All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. For our discussion today on KPIs for small to mid-sized businesses. We've got a good turnout today and excited to have everybody here with us. My name is Tony DeSantis. I lead the data analytics and reporting practice for Lutz and Lutz Technology. Spent over 24 years now in the analytics space, and most of the last 10 to 15 with data visualization tools, both in Tableau, Power BI, and ClickSense, which was previously ClickView. Our team works with clients to help everywhere from the beginning of their analytics strategy to helping them troubleshoot, performance tune existing Power BI reporting and applications, to then building, developing, and hosting reporting for them as well. So we're excited to have you guys join us today and talk through a little bit of a number of different areas, right? And whenever I do these conversations, I like to start with a little bit of level setting, talking about reporting versus analytics, what the tool sets are and how we get there. We'll jump into what some of these common KPIs are, but more generally, how to approach the development of KPIs for your organization, as they are going to be industry and business specific, but some things to think about as you're doing that. Based on the poll question, we've got a number of folks that are at least familiar with Power BI, though many of you are just either starting that journey or haven't gotten into the tool itself. So we're going to take a little deeper dive into what it is, how it's used, and actually do some live walkthrough on setting up some of these KPIs or visuals so you can start to get a sense of what's there. Throughout the session, if there are questions, please send them through the chat. We'll try and address them. If we don't get to them during our hour session, we will circle back with you and follow up on those. And then for any of you that are looking for CPE credit towards the end of the presentation, there will be another poll that will be presented that you'll just need to answer in order to get that. So with that, let's jump in and talk a little bit about reporting and analytics. Probably the majority of you are here because you either thought to yourself or heard one of your colleagues think one of these items out there. We've got disparate data. We're not getting timely reporting. We can't get the information we need. I've got to piece together data from different sources to get to the end result. And that's why tools like Power BI are so important. And while we're focused on Power BI towards the end of this, the approach, the concepts are generally applicable to really any of the data visualization and analytic tools you may be using. I also caveat this with any one of these topics we could take a full hour on. So we are going to touch it at a high level on some of this, and again, can always follow up. We do come out and do trainings and conversations with clients as well, and happy to do that. When we talk about data analytics, it is generally the use of historical data to analyze trends, patterns of behavior, to understand what's working well and what's not working well with the business. Really the idea, and you've probably heard it, is how do we get actionable insights to driving the business? And we'll talk a little bit more about the questions we should be asking ourselves as we look at this, but how are we going to change behavior, increase the good behavior or other activities to continue to improve our business? I always like to differentiate reporting and analytics. I would say that a majority of our clients, which are those small to mid-sized organizations, are first and foremost looking for reporting. They struggle to get their data, look at it in a meaningful way, and have understanding. And what reporting is allowing them to do is start to ask questions about their process, about the beliefs they thought they had and how the business was operating, and then start to get to the next level. The key is, reporting is a foundation for then the analysis and the analytics concepts that come after that. But what tends to get overlooked is that data piece. And in the last couple of weeks, especially as more and more folks have, talked about their reporting and analytics journeys, they're recognizing that data is a potential challenge. And so trying to get it perfect is probably not a winning proposition, but making sure you have the process in place, that you're capturing the right information and pulling that all together does take a majority of the work. Once you have that foundation, though, we can start on the reports and the analysis. And it's not all or nothing, right? As you start to get electronic information, that reporting process is going to help you understand where maybe there's control weaknesses, where there's gaps in the system, and where there's missing data, quite frankly, that you can go and get to. The other piece with reporting is it's generally a push of information. You're sending it to end users that understand the business or what they're looking at, hopefully well enough to be able to look at that, interpret it, and then understand it. Where analytics starts to then become a little bit more of a pool of information. We're looking at answering the questions of why did something happen? Why did sales go up or costs increase? What can we do to change that behavior or encourage good behavior to continue happening? And when we talk about analytics in general, it is the collection of the tools, the techniques, the methodology that we're applying to that data set, to that analysis, to those visuals in order to come to that insight, make decisions, and drive value for the organization. So one of the things we found, and found this visual a number of years ago, and using the Lego concept as we think about the analytic process and the approach. The data, your data, is probably that collection of just haphazard Lego bricks sitting in a pile, hopefully in a bin in your house, and not like my house where they're all over the floor and you're stepping on them. But it's really tough to make sense of what do I have? Were they part of a collection of, one of those sets that you could build something out of? So we need to go through a process of sorting that data out and understand what is it measuring, what does it look like, where are the gaps, and what do we have? And then we start arranging it. Similar size bricks or blocks, colors, all of them start to come together so I know what I'm looking at and thinking about. I then look at reporting and presenting that in a visual manner. Charts, patterns, trends are going to be much more visible if we look at that in a visual context. And then can I explain it in a story? So taking those bricks and creating that story, whether it be the Lego house or the insight into what customer behavior looks like, or the trends in my sales activity and why those trends exist. And so if we think of it through that process, really setting the foundation of getting those bricks, those building blocks organized and designed in a way that we can then report more frequently, more easily, becomes critical to the process. All of that is to underline then the discussion around KPIs, or key performance indicators. Those KPIs are designed to measure some performance, both good and bad. What is the organization doing well? What are we doing that isn't working? And how do we either stop or correct that behavior? At the end of the day, we're looking at maximizing our revenue and minimizing our costs. And that's really simple to say, but as we start to drive into what are the KPIs you should be looking at, asking the next level of questions start to become critical to making those decisions. We talk about some common KPIs that our clients are measuring. But again, I caution that these are at a general level. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do we start asking the right questions, but obviously, sales growth, revenue growth. But, is every sale created equal? If you're selling product that is actually costing you more to make, an increase in sales is really not giving you insight into the organization. So what is that profit or margin that I'm making? In this day and age with supply chain issues, customer demand, backlog is becoming a critical KPI for businesses to look at. How many orders do I have already in place for commitments of time, and how long is it going to take me to fulfill those in order to meet the current demand, and then what happens when I get the next one? That also is going to tie into hiring and labor cost, and when do I hire? What's the right time to hire? Was recently talking with a client that was talking about the fact that their operations folks said, we've got an 18% or 20% increase in sales. We need to hire 20% more people to get that done. But when you dug into it, 15% of that increase was due to the fact that they made price adjustments because of the cost of goods that are coming in. So we've increased sales without increasing the actual throughput, and making sure we're really looking at that information and understanding, and not just taking the numbers for what they are. I've grown up and at some point was told by a colleague that this process and analytics is just as much art as science, and we can make the numbers say whatever we want them to. And you've probably experienced that both within the organization as well as other stats and information that are out there from a reporting perspective. So it is important to understand what you're looking at, how you're using it, what the end user's perspective and view is on these things, and how do we look at that. Budgets versus actuals is a key driver that a lot of folks are looking on. Customer lifetime value, or what value do we get out of that customer? Do they buy a lot at high margin, or a little at high margin? Are they buying a lot at low margin? Is cost of acquisition and retention out of line with what those revenues are and ultimately profits? If you're in more of a service business, what does utilization look like? Are we keeping our people busy in order to maximize value, decrease that backlog? All of these start to be related, but asking the next level of questions becomes important. The other is, with all of these, looking at prior period and comparisons and defining what those prior periods are is important for you and your organization. When we talk about KPIs or analytics in general, and we actually just put a brief blog post out on this last month, is understanding content and context of the data, of the visual, of the report that you're putting out there. And this is important to understand in terms of what is it that we're measuring? Okay, we're measuring sales. Well, what is that telling us about the business? Do we need to look at that by different slices of the business? Is it location specific? Is it customer specific? Where is the value going to be driven from? And how do we look at that? But also, what are the decisions that we're going to make based off of this information? How are we going to change behavior or influence behavior by doing this? And we can spend a lot of time creating nice looking reports, but if we're just going to look at it and move on, we need to question whether or not that is a valued indicator. And you're not going to get them right out of the gate necessarily. This is an iterative process. So you're going to try some things. You're going to experiment with different attributes and different analysis and different KPIs and see what makes sense for the organization, what resonates for the end user. And many of you probably are that end user. So communicating to the team that may be helping you build this is an important part of the process to say what is valuable, why is it valuable, and what else that you may be looking at. And then the context of that KPI or number that you're putting out there. Again, looking at numbers overall may mask issues at a department level or a region level. And we'll show kind of some examples of what I'm talking about there. But when you start to aggregate data, and that's really what KPIs are doing, is showing you at a top level, we lose some of that detail and insight and information. So making sure that you think through and understand from a business perspective what level makes the most sense. And that's where some of the tools like a Power BI are going to start to allow you to navigate and drill into that detail rather than trying to get it all out on one screen at one time. Because the last thing you want to do is overwhelm the end user. One of the things that I've done, and I've taught it at a couple of universities and in other places, is just the concept of data visualization and the science behind it in terms of how end users interpret information, how you encode data and choose the right visuals to make a determination of the end user's visibility and usability. And even here internally at Lutz, we've seen an evolution of the usability of reports and the commentary. It's the same report, but now we're able to use it because we've changed the design and the interaction and the approach of it. So, while we talk about KPIs and meaningful data points for the business, keeping in mind how you present them does make a big difference in the usefulness and how they go. And it's by no means easy. It takes effort. It does take a skill set to look at that and understand it, and not to be discouraged by the initial iterations and passes through this process. So, we talked a little bit about content and context and understanding what level of information is relevant. If we looked at these two charts and said, okay, which company is performing best? The bars are total sales for the organization over a 4-year period, broken out by territories. The line is an indication of total profit. First glance, you may look at this and go, oh my God, what's going on with the bottom left organization? We've got a huge spike and downfall. The other organization seems to be a little flatter, more normal, less variability. If you look closely though, the way this chart is set up, there's two different scales on the right side. And they're actually the same organization showing the exact same information, but visually they are appearing much different. And so you've got a scale that on the left is only from 37% to 38%. All of the data falls within there, but because we've limited that scale, the variability looks to be much greater than it is in reality. On the right-hand side, that scale is expanded to about 30% to 40%, and so it's smoothed out because, again, all of our profit margin is sitting in that 37 to 38%, so it looks a little bit more straight-lined. A little bit of an extreme example, but it highlights why the content, context, and then ultimately the visualization that you choose are important in communicating the information and, again, deciding what the end user needs to be able to do. If you're going to put it in front of an executive, or you as an executive are seeing the bottom left chart, there's going to be an immediate reaction given what our eyes are trained to do. And so, again, we want to make sure that we're looking at the right information in the right way so that we can handle that appropriately. Similar idea here where we're taking that same company and from the bottom left visual, trying to determine what location is driving profits is difficult, right? Because we're showing total sales, and the assumption may be that those with the highest sales are driving profits. But with a profit line that's just aggregated and not showing me differentiation, I don't know that to be true. And so drilling down and viewing that information in the context of by territory, I can now see sales with an overlay of total profits, I can start to have more of a discussion and understand, okay, yes, our North Southwest territory is driving profit and has our highest sales. But the other question we may ask is, are increased sales good sales? Are they meaningful? Are they increasing our bottom line at the end of the day? And if you look down here, where we've got a slightly higher increase in sales in the bottom left, the profit margin has dipped. And not a huge dip for the scale that we're looking at, but there is a decrease. So now we want to start to look at, okay, why are we selling more of our lower profit margin in this area in this year? And do we need to adjust pricing? Do we need to go back to our suppliers and figure out cost adjustments? So really figuring that out as well. On the opposite side, we want to maybe look here on this lower right and go, okay, we haven't really changed total sales, but our profits increased. What are we doing there? Are we selling more of those higher profit items, or have we gotten a better cost break, or what might the case be to really understand and ask those questions? And these are just where I see a lot of organizations fall down, is not drilling down to this next level or asking those set of questions. And primarily that's driven because they don't have the reporting in place to really show a view of the data where they start to ask and then be able to answer those questions. And this is going to exist, whether you call it a KPI, a data point, or other information that you're looking for throughout the reporting and analytics process that you're going to go down. So with that, kind of high level, talking about KPIs, again, we can get into very specifics, but they tend to be industry driven. And then, quite frankly, your business and how you operate and what you look at. The key is, again, asking those relevant questions. And it's usually 2 or 3 layers deep from, we want to increase sales. Well, what do we need to look at? If I run a coffee shop, it's the types of coffees I'm selling, the customers that I'm bringing in. What's the average ticket price per customer? So do I need more customers? Do I need to have more sales? And then what's the cost of that, doing that business? And that cost is not only supply, but labor. We've had clients where looking at their labor cost or labor percentage as a function of sales allowed us to say, you need to change the staffing model and staff in 15-minute increments. And that alone was a 4 or 5 point uptick in margin, because you were staffing when you were busy, you were staffing down when it was quiet, and gaining some efficiencies there. So as an organization, as you start to think about how do we get there? How do we get this more real time? Tools like Power BI have become readily available for organizations to look at, to view, to utilize in this process. And as I said in the beginning, we're focused on Power BI primarily because the majority of our clients are in a Microsoft stack. They've been venturing down this path. We've helped with Tableau and ClickView and others, but also as you look at the landscape and Gartner's Magic Quadrant on BI and analytics tools, Microsoft and Power BI continue to be in that upper right quadrant and leaders in this area. When you start to layer on the platform that Microsoft has around analytics, the other tools that you may be using that are already in the Microsoft landscape, this becomes a really good starting point for a lot of organizations. And you may eventually evolve to an industry-specific tool that is in your operation system that you may find is better. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of power, no pun intended, in Microsoft's product. But you can get similar results out of Tableau, ClickSense, and those things. One of the nice things with Power BI is you can get started for free. The desktop file that you can download is free. It's Excel, it's souped up, right? It gives you the visualization. It operates a lot like that. It lives on your computer. You can share the file out on a network, but somebody's then picking up that file and looking at the current state of it. You can't refresh data automatically, but you can manually refresh data once you've established connections. But it does allow organizations to start with kind of a low cost to entry, and they can start to visualize the information. And I think more importantly, bring together data from multiple systems or files. And so you may be operating where a majority of your business is in Excel files, and you've got 5, 10, 15 of those. You can bring them all in on that desktop file into one location and start to bring the context together with your other data sources. Or it may be a combination of Excel files, your ERP system, your operational system, Salesforce. All of those can be pulled in together and managed and manipulated to start to give you some information and insights. You can then eventually evolve into more of the paid licensing, which allows you to distribute this via mobile. Anybody with an internet connection and that's been granted access to that particular reporting package can then view those on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer. So you've got a lot of options with distribution. Depending on how you manage it, you can even embed it as part of Teams, SharePoint, and other sources. Again, if you're in the Microsoft stack, that allows for that integration to be much simpler and easier to deal with. We've talked kind of briefly on the platforms and setup, but again, the desktop file lives locally on your computer, your laptop. You can have it in a shared location, but having multiple people use it at the same time, making changes, making updates, does start to have some challenges. The Power BI service is what you then upgrade to, where you can publish reports and distribute them, accessing them via mobile apps, again, tablets or the web interface. And then there's 3 basic licensing models as you start to go down that service path. Power BI Pro, which is a $10 per user per license, per month license. Premium adds some enhanced features and is, I think, currently at $20 a month per user per month. And then Premium is really an enterprise solution where you've got potentially hundreds of users. And that may be within the organization or outside the organization, but provides some nice options if you've got that scale. One of the things that we do offer for our clients is the ability to use our premium licensing to host and manage the reporting for them, build it out and distribute so that they're not managing individual licenses. And depending on the volume and the setup, that may make more sense for some clients. Others keep it in-house and manage it that way. And we've also helped set those situations up, build the reports, and then they're off and running as well. So a lot of different options. There does tend to be a little bit of swirl around Power BI and its usability, its performance, its functionality. And I will say in the majority of cases where we've gotten in and begun to investigate complaints of, the report's really slow. It takes forever to refresh. The data's not right. What we find is that it's either the process, the data itself, or the setup of Power BI and how it's used. It's a double-edged sword in terms of it is pretty simple to get started, but you can quickly get it to a point where you're relying on it. You've done a lot of good things, but you're piecing it together. And as you grow that, it's not developed and structured in a way that is meant to operate in a performant type of way. And so understanding how to set up the data model, where and when to use certain features and functions is an important aspect of the process and is a challenge you're going to have in any tool that you're using. and they're not going to be one-to-one exactly the same issues and experiences, but these tools are that. They are tools, and they need to be implemented properly. They need to be executed correctly, and there are ways to tune them and make them better and performant. The other is the usability of them. Again, out of the box, putting visuals on the chart, and we'll show you this in a minute, is pretty simple. Getting them to look good, to interact, to function the right way, starts to build a level of skill set that takes some time and development to do and to think about. And one of our paradigms here at Lutz has been to try and make that end visual more feel like an app, button clicks, interacting with the visual, but making it clear what I need to interact with, so that the end user isn't struggling to navigate and figure out how do I get from one place to the other and utilize this effectively. So again, there's some art to that in how we look at it and go from there. I mentioned it at the beginning of the Power BI conversation, but we have looked at different data sources that we can get into and utilize and bring together. And so there are literally hundreds of connections that you can make with Power BI. Again, other tools will allow similar functionality, but really being able to bring that information together is a huge benefit of these tools, because a lot of times the systems haven't been designed to talk to each other, or the development cost to get them to talk to each other isn't necessarily worth the effort and cost. So, being able to look at that information in one place and do it relatively simple. And I'll use the term relative because they've been selling data visualization tools for 20 plus years and saying, just plug it into your data and away you go. And it's really never that simple. It can be a starting place that simple, but to make it a enterprise or organization reporting solution does take some time, effort, and planning to understand what the strategy is and how you're going to go about it. And I'll show you a little bit more on how we do this in particular here in a few minutes, but I wanted to highlight the data connectivity and connections. The other piece that's important is more nomenclature and, again, just level setting so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about this. A lot of folks talk about dashboards. What I have found is that when we refer to dashboards in Power BI, what we're really talking about is the report layer. Dashboards in Power BI's terminology has a very specific meaning. It is a single page. All of the widgets, visuals that you see on this top dashboard have to exist in a report that's already been built. And then you pin it to the dashboard. This is that executive level view, that drive-by billboard that gives quick information and insight into maybe some of those key KPIs that you need to look at, digest quickly, and move on from. It is not the visual analytics tool that the report is, and we'll talk about this in a second, but it is a component that some organizations use effectively. We have found that we can tend to integrate them a little bit better at the report level. One of the good use cases, though, is if you've got multiple reports covering off on different areas and need to pull in information from each of those, the dashboard does become a functional place to do that because you can have these icons from different reporting areas. On the report side, what we're looking at is, this is probably something more focused on, maybe you're looking at sales specifically or inventory specifically. it may be different departments, but I would caution that there are ways to use a singular report and have that same report utilized across departments, and manage and maintain the security and the visibility depending on the user that logs in. But some organizations do split those reporting out, or if there is just functionally different items and information that they need to report out, so they'll move that to separate reports. Those reports typically have multiple tabs of information, and I'll show you an example specifically of what I'm talking about, but drill throughs, drill downs, different slices and dices of the information packaged together. Really think of it as your management report, that PDF that you might print out. All of those are a tab in the report that you then can navigate to, interact with, and go through. And then each of those reports have an underlying data set that is the source of information. Those data sets are a collection of data sources, not to get too confusing and too technical, but data set A could be Excel, SQL files, my Salesforce. That's all packaged together, and when it's uploaded into the service, that is all part of the data set for that report. It is not a singular data source. So the visual can be a little bit misleading on this one, but it is multiple data sources that then get packaged into a singular container that then can be used for that reporting. So with that, a lot of information. Want to kind of quickly dive through and look at what we can do within Power BI, just to get folks familiar with that set, and also look at where this could ultimately lead to and wind up as you continue to grow and look at the reporting capabilities. So this is Power BI Desktop. For many, if it's your first time in, you're going to open up Power BI once it's been downloaded onto your computer, and it's going to be completely blank canvas to start with. Obviously, this one has information already in it, and we're going to use that to show and demonstrate a couple of things here. But again, this is the look that you would have as a new user coming in. It may ask you to register, do those things. You do need to have a work email address that gets tied in if you start to use the service and licensing, but you don't necessarily have to have that or a Microsoft account for the desktop file. I bring this up only because getting data into Power BI Desktop, if we're starting, might be using this get data function. Otherwise, if you're in the blank canvas, you get prompted for some common data sources, or we can go to the get data area within the desktop file. I'm going to jump back over to my other one and still walk through that process. So you can see getting an Excel workbook into our file. So here I've got some financial reporting dummy data that we're going to be able to use. When I open that up from an Excel perspective, I see a list of the sheets. If we've outlined tables, those get shown up individually as well. Again, depending on how you set that up, this could be out on SharePoint. You can connect directly through SharePoint as well. Clicking on individual files, we can look at it and see the information that's there, get a preview of that information, and we can select those sources of information that we want to bring in. If the tables are in the format that you'd like, we can simply load the data, and they're going to show up on this right-hand sidebar of the tables and lists of fields of information. A lot of times what we're going to do is actually transform the data. And so in the transform step, we're thinking of that in terms of we need to make some changes to the data in order to be able to use that. In this case, our customer table, not much we need to do there. I do want to look at that sales data table and figure out how do I look at that information and what do I need in order to be able to use. One thing we can do that's handy and helpful, if you're familiar in Excel and writing out formulas, Microsoft's tried to simplify some of that. So here in order number, if in other places or other systems we're not prefacing with, in this case, the SO dash, we can go ahead and transform that by splitting the column. And there's a built-in function. We can split column. So we chose this split column up here. We can decide what delimiter we do. In this case, there's a dash there, so we're doing a custom delimiter. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And then automatically, Microsoft has gone and Power BI has split that out. Now, we may decide, you know what, I can go ahead and delete this because this means nothing. But it might be an indicator that you need and want to reference to. There are nuances to all of this, and not going down all the detail, but I did want to highlight and use this in particular, because again, this is where some folks may struggle in understanding data and what's happening. Microsoft's trying to be helpful, and what they've done is change the data type in this order number field to a number. If I go back a step, you'll see when it's first split out, I had leading zeros. Getting rid of those may cause you problems if you're trying to link between multiple data sources. So again, being aware of your data, being aware of the connectivity, this is a common pitfall where we see folks that have struggled or saying, I can't get the data to join, it's not showing me anything that they need to look at. There's a whole class on, how do we do this? How do we look at this data modeling itself? But just want to highlight a couple of features and functions to be aware of for those of you that are going to jump in and try and do some of this yourself and be aware of. So the other nice thing is what Power BI is doing is capturing the steps. And now every time I refresh the data, it's going to go through those steps again. So it creates a repeatable process that you don't need to worry about the complex spreadsheet that you've created and the cut and paste exercise that happens, making sure somebody remembers to do all of the steps. And if we wanted to say, you know what, I don't want it to change the data type, I can just delete that from the process and have that here. Other things that may happen at this stage are creating a calculated column. So here we've got order quantity and unit price. We do happen to have a line total, which is the sum of the the product of the multiplication and unit price. But if we did want to add a calculated column, we can simply add column, a custom column. We're going to use order quantity. We're going to multiply it by our unit price. Hit OK, and now I've added that column. You can see it's coming out to be the same numbers there. We can name that column. Again, showing functionality, pieces that are useful. This also becomes important for those that may be using data warehouses or data lakes. We can keep the raw data where it lives, and then do the transformation as we're bringing it into the analytic tool to potentially speed things up or keep clean data. Again, considerations, things you need to look through. There's obviously a lot of different features and functionality, and don't want to get lost in that. The other just kind of function I want to be able to show real quick is on this cash flow data. When I bring that in, it is formatted as a table of information with different years across the top. And so this may look familiar in spreadsheets. This doesn't create a nice, easy way to report and consolidate and aggregate information, especially if we're trying to group and look across years and across different data sets. So you're probably familiar with pivot tables within Excel. You've got the ability to unpivot that data here in Power BI as well. So we've taken it from kind of that flat, have a bunch of years, the same information, to we've essentially created a row per year per row in that table. So now I've got cash receipts listed out multiple times. and that repeats over and over again. While you wouldn't necessarily want this in your Excel file, having it in this format from a reporting perspective and aggregation perspective is going to be important. So again, highlights a couple of common important things that can be used and looked at, and that's where this unpivot column option exists up here. When you're done that process, you're going to close and apply. That's going to load data into your what's called model or your file, and then you can start building your analysis, your visuals, and start to look at those types of things. Here I've got my list of tables and measures that are created. Again, this is important to keep track of and highlight and understand and try and keep it as clean as possible, both in the number of tables we're bringing in, but also the number of fields. One of the first things we do when we're asked by a client to look at an existing file that may not be working well is do an analysis and tell them how many fields they've brought in that are not being used. Sometimes it's hundreds of fields that have been loaded into the file that are not being used. It's easy enough to add additional fields as you need them. The old kind of paradigm of let's bring in everything, so and then figure out what we need can have performance consequences. And so there's ways to manage and handle that and deal with it. The other thing, and again, not to get too technical, there's a view of the data model, understanding that a lot of people have heard of Power BI but haven't gotten started or using it, or is more detailed than you care to look at. But it's important to have these relationships established and built out properly as you begin to enhance and increase the complexity of what you're doing. And it's important to look at that and understand that. And I bring it up again just to have it as an indicator, something to think about, having the back of your mind as you start to develop, that we make sure we have the right pieces of information. And then the last piece to highlight is the idea of a dates table. A lot of the information, if you're looking at transactions, are going to have dates associated with them. Power BI will go and look at that field, determine that it looks like a date, and then create some minimal pieces of information called a hierarchy. What's the month, what's the year, what's the quarter associated with that, which can be helpful starting out of the gate. Again, does create some performance problems if you've got a lot of fields like that. So what we advocate, and most of the best practices advocate, are around creating a date table. And you can make this where it's got any number of days for as long as you want. And then having different slices of those dates. So we know the year, the quarter it exists in, the month of the year, the day of the month, labels so that we see text descriptions rather than actually numeric descriptions. This is important because it helps you sort and modify and manage your data appropriately. Again, something to keep in mind, not to overwhelm and go, oh my gosh, where do I get started? But it is something that these concepts, regardless of the visualization tool and regardless of what you're told by the sales process, are going to need to happen at some point in the evolution of your reporting and analytics, so that it is dynamic, that it is practical, that it is functional for you as you move, expand, and increase the complexity. So we've gone ahead and we've gotten the data, we've got it existing over here. We can expand any one of these and see all the fields of information that go in here. Our visualization allows us to decide what kind of visual we want to use, or you can just start selecting information and checking it off, and it will start to appear within your canvas. Generally defaults to a table, and then you get other information that starts to show up. By default, you will start aggregating information. So really, I don't want it down at an order number level. I want to see line total. And so now I've got a total of what we called sales originally. And so we can start to look at that and look at information. There's formatting options and a whole host of other things that we can start to look at. But from here, we can then say, okay, well, maybe what I really want is I want to see this in a bar chart. And I look at that and go, okay, that's great, but too much detail. And now we're starting to manipulate the charts and information that we're looking at. So instead of order date, I'm going to go to that date table that we created and looked at, and I'm going to grab the year. And so now I've got a bar chart that's showing me by year the information that's there. That's helpful, but really I don't want them as a legend. I want them actually as the axis. So I'm taking them off the legend, I put them in the axis, and now I see I've got my years of information. A couple of different things you could do here. One is I've got year on the axis, but I may say, okay, I want to drill into months after that and be able to see where this goes. Now that I've added 2 lines onto the axis, there's a feature up here that I can drill down to the next level. And now I'm seeing it by month. Again, something to keep in mind and be aware of as you're getting started here is that if you look at this, I've separated out my total sales by different years. When I drill down to that next level, it doesn't know to look at one particular year. So this is looking at all 4 years worth of data, and this is the total for January of all 4 years of information. So this is that content and context that we talked about earlier, understanding and knowing how we're using this, how we're looking at it, and what happens when we do that. So if I look at this, I can say, okay, I just did a copy and paste. I'm going to change this one just to have months. And now, because they're using the same information and they've got relationships, I can interact with the top visual and see what's happening. So for 2020, I'm seeing the makeup of that total monthly population and see how that changes. And I can select multiple at a time to view and visualize that. So that interactivity starts to get built in. There's also ways to limit this and say, okay, rather than highlighting, I want this to actually drill down this bottom one and only show me for whatever selection I've made. So there's this option of editing interactions. Again, probably too much detail for what we're looking to do, but we just want to show you conceptually what's happening. But here I'm turning off. Here I either turn off, I can highlight which it was at, or I filter. And so now that I've set that situation, rather than highlighting, this is showing me just 2020, just 2021. Some of you may be asking the question, well, why is 2021 so low? We look at it, we've only got data through August. So this becomes really powerful as you start to look at the information that's there. One other piece, there are the ability to add columns or measures. Measures help with performance, and they also help with looking at information that isn't quite a row by row calculation. And highlighting this so you understand the capabilities of what's possible. Here, these are actually slicers that we've just formatted that, again, allow me to pick information, change, and see charts interact. But you'll also notice here where I've got a table of all 4 years, I don't want that to filter down when I select a certain year. I just want my visual to change. And so we've managed and changed that. For those that may be a little bit more advanced, and we talked about the year over year calculations and same periods, we've got some measures here that start you off on looking at how do we calculate total sales, cost of sales, start to put some formulas together. For those that are heavy into Excel, think of it as Excel formulas, but then there's some built-in functionality with Power BI that allow you quarter-to-date, year-to-date information. So again, I'm going to just do a quick copy and paste on this one and move it over. We can increase the size here so that if you're watching this on video and want to take a look at these, you can kind of get a quick snapshot and see the formulas that are being used as good starting points when you're looking at period and period comparisons. Okay. So with the last couple of minutes, again, I know we've gone through a lot. I want to bring us back to what is possible and where this could all ultimately go. And it can be daunting. I get that to start. But we wanted to kind of give you an idea of what the possibilities were, what you could do, and where this could ultimately go. So here's a version where we've got a kind of a KPI dashboard that's summarizing a number of different pieces of information and components. This is all driven off of that desktop file that you saw. We've uploaded it to the service. It's now, I'm viewing it through a web interface, and gives me some stats and information that I can look at. After looking at that, I may say, okay, I want to drill in and look at more detail. We can drill in, again, kind of that app focus. We're using a link, and now we've got buttons to kind of navigate. And this can be as complex or as simple as you want. But we've recreated a view of an income statement where we're looking at the current year, prior year information. We're doing some comparisons of this year versus last year, looking at it as percentages. We've got some visuals of information there as well, with the ability to say, you know what, I want to look at a different year, and we can go in and do that. Again, this is formatted and designed to be simple, easy to navigate. It's managing our screen real estate as well by having the filters pop out and hide. But these are kind of advanced steps that ultimately you may want to get to. We go to something like revenue insights, where we've got some of those top 5 customers, but still have information. Maybe I want to go in and drill in by city. Now my views have changed, and I can start to look at information that's pertinent to our top 5 cities or our top 5 customers, and understand what's going on there and what they're looking at. Okay, we've got the ability to add filters, look at different activities, different classifications based on how they're set up, and look at that information to figure out what decisions we need to make about the organization. So we're going to bring up the last poll question real quick. I know we're close on time. I want to get you that poll set up and your CPE credit. Thank you for attending today. If there's questions that we're throwing in the chat, or if you think of it after, please reach out and let us know. We're happy to have conversations on moving your analytics and reporting forward. Thank you.